A few years ago, there was a movie called The Man Who Sued God. The main character in this comedy film was a lawyer who'd had it up to here with his job, with his boss, with his clients, just with life in general. So he decided to empty all his savings out of the bank and buy a big boat and set out for the high seas and leave everything behind. But his brand new boat was destroyed by a lightning strike. And the insurance company said they wouldn't pay his claim because they said the lightning strike was what? An act of God. And so he decides he's going to take God to court. And he does it by suing God's representatives. So, of course, his local parish and his bishop and the Pope. Now, again, of course, the film is a comedy, but it still deals with some very real issues, some very real questions that people have sometimes. The Jewish author, the famous author Elie Wiesel, once wrote about a very similar trial that he actually witnessed firsthand in real life when he was imprisoned in Auschwitz during World War II, when 3 rabbis who were also in prison there decided to put God on trial for violating his own covenant with the Jewish people. So they charged God with turning his back on his people, for refusing to act in their hour of greatest need, as millions of Jews were being exterminated in those Nazi death camps. Well, the trial, Wiesel says, lasted several nights as evidence was gathered and as witnesses were heard, and the verdict was unanimous by those rabbis. God was found guilty of crimes against humanity. And when the verdict was announced, Wiesel said, there was a stunned silence among all the people in that room. And then one of the rabbis looked to the skies and he said, it's time for evening prayers. And all those people who had just put God on trial faithfully prayed the traditional Jewish evening service together anyway. Now, some people might see that as a complete contradiction, praying to a God that you've just put on trial. But there's a long, true Jewish tradition of being completely devoted to God on the one hand, while at the same time feeling frustrated by his apparent inaction or silence on the other. So the Psalms, for instance, are filled with those kinds of questions. In the Psalms, we hear things like, how long, O Lord? Why have you forgotten me? Why are you so distant and afar? My God, why have you forsaken me? But every single time, those heartbroken pleas ultimately end with expressions of faith, with trust in God's faithfulness, remembering who he actually is. In our first reading today, the prophet Habakkuk echoes that same tradition. So on the one hand, first he bemoans God's apparent refusal to listen and to respond. But then finally, what does he do? He falls back on God's promise that his vision will not disappoint, that it will be fulfilled, that even if it delays, it will come, it will be victorious. So God simply tells Habakkuk today, wait and trust and have faith. The just one, he says, because of his faith shall live, and the victory will surely come, he says. The just one, because of his faith, because of his patient trust, shall live, and God's victory will surely come. Those are words for us to, I think, live by even today as we continually press on in the fight for the right to life. It's no secret that even though our founding documents guarantee that the right to life is God-given, that no one can take that right away, well, it's a right that in reality is violated all the time in our great nation, most heinously through the acceptance of abortion, which kills around 118 babies every single day just in the state of Illinois, where we have a governor who is proud to make our state the most abortion-friendly state in the country, a shameful title that we have here in Illinois. And the more that he and some other politicians push their support of abortion and fetal stem cell research and euthanasia and other assaults on human life, the more we might feel some days like Habakkuk, saying, how long, O Lord, how long? We cry for your help, but are you listening? Why do we have to see such violence and such misery? Why do you let us look upon this? And the Lord responds to us in the same way that he did to Habakkuk. He says, trust and have faith and keep praying and keep working and keep speaking out. The vision will surely come, he says, and by your faithfulness to this cause, you shall know life. You shall know salvation. And indeed, in many ways, we do see the vision coming to fruition. We see it coming into focus, in spite of the best efforts of the pro-abortion and the anti-life forces within our society. We see the vision taking place. For instance, Roe versus Wade is no more. Praise God. Roe versus Wade is no more. Just a few years ago, whoever thought we would be able to say that? Roe versus Wade is no more. We see the vision, too, in the hundreds of thousands that continue to march every year in Washington, D.C. for the March for Life. We see that vision taking place in the shifting attitudes of the younger generations, especially, who are more and more increasingly pro-life. We see it in the way that more and more states are abolishing the death penalty. We see it in all the medical advances that are happening through adult stem cell research. While fetal stem cell research is giving us nothing, it's yielding absolutely nothing for us. We see it in the way that so many people just recoil in horror and disgust over the news of warfare and terrorism and discord and gun violence and just the vicious nature of so much that's on social media. But all these are signs that the vision is coming into focus if we remain faithful in the fight, no matter the resistance that we might encounter, whomever we receive that resistance from, even if it's from our own loved ones sometimes. Today's gospel echoes that same call then to remain faithful. The section of Luke's gospel that we heard from deals with all the challenging demands of being a disciple of Christ. And Jesus, of course, calls all of us as his disciples to be people of faith and trust and perseverance, saying that even a small amount of faith is enough to work miracles and achieve great things. And the gospel today then goes on to speak about the obedience, which is our only proper response to God's love for us, to his goodness to us. In other words, if we're looking for reward, or if our motive in serving God is in fact self-serving, then we're missing the point altogether, aren't we? Each one of us are people who have been redeemed and saved and loved and forgiven and healed by God's love. If we remember what God has done for us through Jesus, well, then we'll continue to serve him. Not hoping for thanks, not hoping for rewards or even success, but we'll serve him simply in response to his kindness to us, his love for us. Another Holocaust survivor, another great Jewish author, Viktor Frankl, once wrote that if we live our lives solely in pursuit of our own happiness, that happiness is always going to elude us. We'll only find real happiness, Frankl says, by dedicating our lives to a cause that's greater than ourselves. And as we all know, there is no greater cause. There's no more pressing cause in our modern world than the right to life. More than any other cause, that vision of our loving Father needs our faithfulness and our devotion and our trust and our perseverance. As frustrating as that fight might be sometimes, as Catholic Christians, we understand the need to keep at it. And we serve God in that way, not out of fear, not out of a sense of duty, or even out of a sense of hope for heaven, but because we know and we remember what God has done for us and who he is. He saved us through the death and resurrection of his only Son. So even when the fight for life, or even just kind of life in general, makes us wonder from time to time if God is listening, even when we sometimes feel overwhelmed or maybe discouraged by things, we still hold fast to our faith because it's founded on God's prior faithfulness to us, on his love for us, his goodness to us. It's that kind of faith, as we hear today, that over time moves mountains and uproots mulberry trees and allows people to pray even in the midst of the hell of places like Auschwitz, and keeps us marching onward towards God's vision of the right to life for all of his children.